So welcome, Scott Nelson, to the Upgraded Executive Podcast.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
So Scott, I've been familiar with Joovv now for some time. Could you give the audience a little bit about your background and how you came to be a co-founder of Joovv?
At Joovv, we manufacture red light therapy devices. Our claim to fame, so to speak, is full body applications, so full body products. We sell them direct to consumer online through our e-commerce store. Before I go into my background specifically, I think we launched our first device in February of 2016. So we're recording this in late 2019, the calendar year. And so it's been, almost 4 years since we launched our first product. And it's been kind of a wild ride. But before Joovv, I've actually spent most of my professional career, almost all of it really, in the traditional med tech space. That's actually where we started the companies in Minneapolis, which is kind of the Silicon Valley of the medical device arena. And really more specifically, my wheelhouse before Joovv was really the cardiovascular space. So commercializing products like arterial balloons and stents and thrombectomy catheters. So although Joovv is technically kind of a med tech company, I really didn't have any sort of formative experience in kind of the light therapy arena before Joovv.
So why Joovv and why red light therapy?
There's certainly some overlap and some parallel with my professional experience in the med tech arena. But really, the origin story of Joovv it's quite interesting and probably not too dissimilar to most startup stories in that and this dates back to early 2015. We were in, like I mentioned, Minneapolis, Minnesota, which gets very dark and very cold during the winter months. And so my wife and her sister purchased red light therapy treatments or a red light therapy package at a local spa in Minneapolis. And they went consistently to this location, this commercial facility, for 8 to 10 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 times a week. So they went a lot. That's an understatement. But having said that, they not only really felt good after each treatment, but they saw noticeable benefits when it comes to their health, primarily related to skin health, reduction of age spots, wrinkles, stretch marks from pregnancies, et cetera. And so they were really interested in the therapy. And at the time, the only products available for home use, right? Because they didn't want to keep going to this facility that often. It's not overly budget friendly and it's not convenient to say the least. And so they were looking for products they could primarily use in home that were bigger, that were full body applications. And at the time, there really wasn't anything available. As a consumer, if you were looking to purchase a red light therapy product at the time, you were really relegated to smaller handheld devices. Most of them were underpowered, and so the product offering really wasn't there. And so they were kind of looking for. That's kind of where the idea or the concept sort of started. Me personally, I was super skeptical about the therapy up front. I was very cynical. I thought it was woo-woo science, but my wife and her sister were pretty convinced. And so I spent a little bit of time doing some research on PubMed just to try to uncover what the science really does say about this particular therapy, expecting that the results would be pretty limited because there really wasn't a lot of information that was readily available online about red light therapy, or in the world of academia, it's referred to as photobiomodulation. And so I went knee deep into PubMed and was very quickly blown away by the sheer amount of science that supports the therapy. And so really, I guess to sum up sort of our origin story, it was a combination of my wife and her sister being pretty interested in the treatments. The product landscape was pretty limited, and there wasn't really any. Although the science was there really wasn't anyone talking about this online. And so, you put all three of those sort of pillars in place, and it seemed like, maybe there's a business here. And so that's what sort of got us off to the races in 2015 before we ended up launching our first product in early 2016.
That's awesome. For the people in the audience that don't know what red light therapy is, could you give them a quick overview of what it is and how it works?
Yeah, I would consider it kind of a natural health or alternative health treatment. Our core customer base consists of people that our core avatars would be people that are looking to either optimize their health or treat a certain condition in the most natural way possible. And red light therapy kind of fits under that umbrella or that category. And really the treatment is quite simple. It's just a matter of standing or sitting in front of a device that delivers red and near infrared wavelengths of light. And light is one of these, although it sounds sort of contrarian, light is one of these underappreciated aspects to our overall health. And I'm sure we'll get into this conversation in more detail. Most people are familiar with the role that macronutrients and diet plays in terms of our overall health and fitness and training and sleep. And there's definitely certainly more awareness around the importance of sleep for overall function. not just executive function, but light and the type of light that we're exposed to on a consistent basis really does matter. And that's one of the things that we're trying, in terms of market development as a business, we're trying to raise more awareness for that concept, that light is very, very crucial for overall health and overall health optimization and performance.
I agree. And I think the importance of sunlight is something that's like massively underestimated. And I think that particularly, many of us don't get outside enough because we have desk jobs and we're in offices. How does red light play into the total spectrum of light? Could you just give the audience a view on the full spectrum of light and where red light sits and why it's so important?
It's very, very broad. And red light therapy actually falls within a very narrow range in that broader spectrum. And so these specific wavelengths that kind of fall within this topic of red light therapy are between 600 and about 1,000 nanometers. And so it's actually very, very narrow, a very, very narrow aspect of that full spectrum of wavelengths that I mentioned. And that's that very narrow window, which is often called the optical window or the therapeutic window, has been proven in hundreds, if arguably thousands of published clinical data to be very favorable in terms of optimizing our bodies to produce, or helping our bodies to produce more cellular energy. And so these the wavelengths of light that fall within that very narrow window have a unique ability to not only penetrate through our tissues, but help the mitochondria in our cells produce more ATP energy.
What's the difference, Scott, between red light therapy and an infrared sauna?
If we use that food example, right, the carbohydrate example that I just gave you guys, the reality is our bodies respond physiologically to different wavelengths of light, similar to they would a high glycemic carbohydrate versus a low glycemic carbohydrate. So infrared light in general is actually that spectrum of light, infrared light, is actually very, very broad. And so you have wavelengths that fall within the infrared A or near infrared range. Then you have mid and far infrared. And mid and far infrared wavelengths of light, those are the ones that are often found in an infrared or dry sauna. And those are great at producing heat in our body. So they're great for the purposes of sauna therapy. But they induce a different near infrared light, which is infrared A wavelengths of light, induce a different physiological response. They actually help the mitochondria in our cells produce more energy. And so I think the important point to understand here is that just like food, and our body responds to food in different ways, our bodies respond to different wavelengths of light. So it's really important to kind of understand when you talk about infrared light, the type of infrared light that's being delivered from a certain device is really, really important.
And what if people are thinking, well, if I'm going to put a light source close to my body, is there any risk of cancer or causing any damage to your cells? Because I think that when I've spoken to people about red light therapy in the past, that's been their initial response, and I've had to reassure them that this isn't a damaging light source; it's a very safe light source. What is your response to people when they raise that concern?
Yeah, this is one of the therapies that is very, very difficult to find any sort of negative side effects from. In fact, you'd be hard pressed to find any. Unless you're, I think probably the only caveat would be if you're either photosensitive or maybe consuming a medication that causes photosensitivity. That might be the only potential negative downstream ramification from exposure to red and near infrared light. And it's just important to remember these are the same wavelengths of light that come from natural sunlight. In fact, these wavelengths of light are most present in the sunrise and sunset. And so it's very natural. It's a very natural for our bodies to be exposed to these types of wavelengths of light. The only thing that I think kind of important to call out is that there is a point where our bodies don't respond to these wavelengths of light. Meaning, the best example I'd give you is water consumption. As long as it's a high quality water, is a good thing, right? But if you do take that to the extreme levels, there is a point where too much water consumption can probably be bad, but it's on the very ends of that spectrum. The same thing kind of applies to red and near infrared light. There is a point where our bodies don't respond favorably anymore, but it's really, really hard to get to that point.
In terms of the products that you sell, what's recommended? Like, how large are they? What's the range in terms of price? And if I were using your product, like how long how long do I use it for, and what kind of difference would I know, and how quick would that happen?
The two major gaps in the kind of the product landscape, the therapy product landscape that we identified back in early 2015 were size and then power. And the reason for that is two things. One is that if you're using a device that's what we consider underpowered, you just have to use it for a longer period of time to receive a clinically relevant result. And so we thought most people don't want to have to use something for 30, 40, 50 minutes a day. It just becomes too time consuming. Most people want to, do a treatment in, 5 to 10 minutes and call it good. And so that's one of the things that we try to optimize for is power output, not power consumption, but power output. And then the other big thing that we try to optimize our devices for is size. And so one of our core thesis as a company is that full body light therapy is optimal versus targeted treatments. Targeted treatments can work, but you're just limited to a very small treatment area. Where our thesis was that full body applications, because of the systemic benefit, are better for optimal health. And so with our devices, they're really actually because of those two things, they're really pretty simple to use. You can start out with a smaller, and our devices are modular in nature. So you can start out with a smaller one that begins at $695 USD. And because they're modular, you can add on to it over time, kind of like Lego blocks. And so you can build out a full body system over time. And so you can start out with a smaller device that's kind of like the size of, it's about 16 inches wide by about 9 inches. 16 inches tall by about 9 inches wide. Something so like a 15-inch MacBook. Think of the footprint of like a 15-inch MacBook. That's probably the best example. That's our smallest, one of our smallest modular devices. And then we have full body systems that are 6 feet tall by 3 feet wide that consist of multiple devices connected together because of that patented modular design. And that those bigger systems around, depending on when how the configuration you opt for, they're around $6,000 USD. So anything from around $600 to $6,000 is kind of the price range. And the biggest difference, the only difference between those devices is really just the treatment area, right? They all deliver the same type of power and they deliver the same wavelengths of light. It's really just the treatment area. So if you're a health nut or a fitness nut and super into this, you may opt to go with the big full body system right from the get-go. Most people, whether it's for budget reasons or maybe they're skeptical and they just want to try it out, they'll opt for a smaller device, right? And if they like the therapy, they can add on to it over time through that modular concept.
And how long would somebody use it for to get maximum benefit?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what your goals, what you're trying to solve for from a health perspective. But for general health and wellness, we recommend about 8 to 10 minutes per treatment area. So as an example, take one of our smaller devices. That's the size of that 15-inch MacBook. If I was just into skin health as an example, or maybe even just cognitive function, I was trying to optimize for that. I would just, it's a little bit bigger than like the size of my face. So I would just, sit or stand in front of it, in front of the device for about 8 to 10 minutes. And then that's it.
And I don't know if you can answer this. So I'm just trying to get my head around the before and after. How long to get rid of these wrinkles that are appearing on my face,
or the ones that are on my face as I age, right? We all have those. It's funny that we're even talking about this because this is kind of like skin health is one of those areas we don't overly promote, but it's one of the across the board. It's probably one of the most common things that people report back on is, hey, I bought. A common response is like, I bought this device because Ben Greenfield mentioned it for muscle recovery or something like that. But it's like, man, I've used it now for a month and people are thinking I'm doing Botox injections, because my skin looks, more fuller, there's a glow to it, et cetera. And that's kind of one of the nice sort of, byproducts from using red light therapy is that, typically you're going to experience better skin. But to answer your question, skin related benefits typically come with time and consistency. And I think part of the reason is because we look at ourselves every day in the mirror. So it's harder to note subtle qualitative changes, but most of the clinical literature suggests that you need to be using, the therapy for, 3 to 4 weeks before you'll notice significant changes relative to, something like fighting wrinkles as an example. 2
follow-ups up to that. So you mentioned about a glow. Is somebody effectively getting a tan, or is that different? How are you defining glow?
Yeah, no, it's definitely different than a tan. So our devices do not deliver, UV ultraviolet wavelengths of light. And so, but I think that's interesting that you brought that up because that's a perfect example of our bodies responding to a wavelength of light. In that case, it's ultraviolet light, and our bodies then respond in that fashion. But no, the glow is not a tan per se. The glow is probably a little bit more qualitative in nature, but most of the skin-related benefits when it comes to like those aesthetic types of changes come from increased collagen levels. So the fibroblasts in our skin, those that are responsible for producing collagen, those fibroblasts are basically working better. They're producing more energy. They're working more efficiently. And so a byproduct of that is increased collagen levels.
Final question on that, actually, what I was thinking before when you were saying about energy. So Nick and myself, we covered this in quite a few of the early episodes. We were talking around going outside, getting more vitamin D, getting in the sun, and that has a really positive impact in terms of somebody's energy level and their mood. Is there any correlation between using your product and somebody's, I guess, perceived happiness?
Definitely. In fact, a lot of people that are listening to this have probably heard of like the happy lamps, right? Those lamps that, no? Have you guys heard of those happy lamps? Yeah. They're the devices that deliver bright white light. And most people that live in, northern climates during the winter will sometimes pick up, a quote unquote happy light. It mimics the sun. There's not a lot of good science around that per se, but to answer your question, yes, there's some really interesting data around qualitative mood changes when exposed to red and near infrared light. And so that's one of those. In fact, there's a lot of emerging research around kind of, seasonal affective disorder, depression, etc. And red and near infrared light's ability to either reduce symptoms of depression or just help in that category altogether. So yeah, that's definitely one of those kind of emerging kind of research categories with respect to red and near infrared light.
Cool. So Scott, when I first came across infrared light, I was quite skeptical, and I thought I'd just sort of try it out. So I bought a very basic device to start off with, and I've now got a whole body system. But some of the things that I found is that whenever you get some kind of injury to the skin, whether it be an insect bite or a graze, it seems for me personally to heal about 50% faster. It's not just me. So my sister, she gets really bad insect bites. Whenever she gets bitten, she has a really bad reaction, and then she ends up on antibiotics, and her leg goes like twice as big. But whenever she gets bitten now, she uses red light therapy, and literally she gets a minimal reaction. The body seems to repair itself faster. And the one thing that shocked me most was my uncle, who was waiting for knee replacement surgery. He was on morphine, and the pain was still excruciating. I bought him a red light therapy device, and it really helped with the pain management. And that's one aspect of red light therapy that I've not really heard before. I've heard lots of people talking about the impact it has on your skin and your energy, but the fact that it helped him with his pain management really surprised me. Is that a common known thing through red light, or could it be placebo?
No, in fact, I'm sure this might sound a little bit like a late night QVC commercial, but I think the important point to remember here is like all of these benefits that we'll probably get into here, they're all proven in published peer reviewed clinical literature. I think which is really important for anyone that kind of takes a science first approach. But those two areas that you just mentioned. So skin health, and when I say skin health, I'm kind of looping in recovery, healing, sort of recovering from skin-related injuries. That and pain and inflammation, those are two of the three, I would say, biggest benefit categories that have been proven time and time again in hundreds of published clinical studies with respect to red and near infrared light therapy. So there's no doubt anyone who looks into these types of treatments with an objective perspective, they're going to quickly find out that skin health and then pain reduction are two of the biggest benefits that they'll get from consistent use of red and near infrared light therapy. The third one being muscle recovery. So loads and loads of published evidence that suggests faster muscle recovery. And that's why it's really, this type of therapy is really, really picking up speed kind of in the ranks of professional athletics, is because of the existing evidence and those N of one types of studies, right? Athletes looking for an edge, they've got, disposable income, and they're willing to run, experiments on themselves. And they quickly understand that hey, after this certain workout, I know how my body typically responds, and wow, I'm recovering that much faster, or I'm feeling that much better, etc. And so those are three of the big benefit categories with red and near-infrared light is skin health, recovering from skin-related injuries, pain reduction, and then enhanced muscle recovery. And there's a bunch of other kind of emerging benefit categories, that we can go into, but those are definitely the big three.
What are the other ones, just at a high level?
Yep. So brain health and or cognitive function. So when I say brain health, I know that's kind of vague, but cognitive function meaning faster reaction times, enhanced learning and memory, things like that, kind of more, executive function related. And then what the other aspect of brain health is really more clinical nature. So taking patients that are suffering from issues like Alzheimer's and dementia and seeing dramatic improvements in some of the symptoms derived from those conditions with the use of red and near-infrared light therapies.
How's it affecting the neural network in the brain?
There's been a lot more research with respect to cognitive function and brain health over the past 3 to 4 years. But actually, the neurons in your brain that are responsible for producing new synapses. So kind of this aspect of synapsogenesis, I believe, is how most academics refer to it as. But those types of cells respond in the same way that other cells throughout our body do, right? They have mitochondria that produce more ATP. So those cells that are responsible for creating new synapses, they just function better, when exposed to near-infrared light, especially because near-infrared light has a unique ability to penetrate deeper into our body. In fact, it can penetrate through bone. The energy does dissipate as it travels through bone, but I think that's pretty unique. And so that's sort of what's happening is that, that same mechanism of action, right? That the mitochondrial response to these wavelengths of light, it holds true with any cell that has a mitochondria. And so even the cells in our brain that are responsible for, creating new synapses.
One of the, I guess, funny things around red light therapy that I often see people talking about is people stood there, no clothes on, the junk's out, and they're getting red light therapy. And, I've done it a few times at home, and my wife's like, "What are you doing?" You stood there, with no clothes on in front of a bright red light, and from outside the house it looks like we're running some kind of brothel because it's such a bright light. And generally I'm stood on a vibration plate too, which doesn't make it better.
Nick, for the audience, though, you do have your curtain shut, just to go.
I do, yeah. Is there any strong science behind using red light, as in full body with no clothes on, from a hormone production and a hormone boosting point of view?
Yeah. This topic is super interesting, and I don't want to get too long-winded with my answer, but you guys know Ben Greenfield, right? You're familiar with him? Yeah. So this was our early days at Joovv. We had been trying to get him to use our devices for a period of months. And then, I don't know, after the course of maybe 6, 7, 8 months, he sends me texts me a random video, and he's like, "Hey, I just posted this on my YouTube channel." And the video was him in kind of a selfie style video of him saying, "Hey guys, this is Ben Greenfield. I'm shining this big, bright red light on my balls right now." And so anyway, I get this kind of random video and I'm like, oh no, this is super interesting. He went in a completely different direction than what we were kind of talking to him about the use cases for red light therapy. But ironically enough, he had been corresponding with Dr. Ali Sovajarvi, who's, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He's in Finland. And Ali, he was like, they had some back channel conversations. He was like, "No, Ben, actually there's some really interesting, evidence, even dating back to hundreds of years ago, that actually exposing not only your body, but also more specifically your testes, if you're a guy, that will lead to, increased testosterone production." And Ben was like, Ben, he's like, I'm going to give it a shot. There's really no downside risk. It's just bright red light. I'm going to give it a shot. And sure enough, he noticed significant changes himself. And then, fast forward, over the course of 2 to 3 years, we've got not only a lot of anecdotal evidence from health nuts, right? People like Mike Munsell and Luke Story that did nothing different other than introduce full body light therapy into their daily routine, and saw dramatic increases in their testosterone production, through pre and post blood work, actually. So this is not just kind of like they feel better. This is actually through, blood work. And so as a company, we're like, wow, this is really interesting. There's not really a lot of published evidence that suggests this. It's pretty limited right now anyway. And so we're like, we're going to study this in more detail. And in fact, we wrapped up an early study, relatively small in nature. I think there was maybe a total of 30 participants. So not terribly small, but small in comparison to some, where we studied red light therapy in both men and women that were on either a standard American diet, or a standard American diet meaning, it's not the greatest,
yeah.
right? And those that were on a ketogenic diet. One group or cohort of people were just eating a kind of a normal everyday diet and then introducing red light therapy as the intervention. The other group did keto and then also used red light therapy. The group that ate the normal diet in both men and women actually saw really good hormonal responses. In women, it was increased progesterone. In men, it was increased testosterone. But as you might expect, the group that was on the ketogenic diet that also incorporated red therapy saw even more exaggerated results. And we're talking result of like hundreds, 200% increases in their testosterone if you're a guy. So again, the caveat here is that our devices aren't cleared by regulatory bodies for testosterone replacement therapy. This particular study was relatively small, but the results were really, really compelling. And so we're actually in the process of beginning to study this out in more detail, these hormonal responses in both men and women, whether they're on certain diets or not. It's really interesting science. We're learning a lot more through a lot of these emerging kind of benefit categories about the different mechanisms of action. And in fact, we just did an FAQ kind of write-up piece with Dr. Praveen Irani, who's one of the leading experts in this field on our website. And he clearly, lays out the fact that there's kind of 2 or 3 kind of emerging mechanisms that, we're just learning about over the past, 1 to 2 years. And there's a lot of these different mechanisms at play, whether it's your mitochondria producing more energy or whether different cells respond favorably than others, et cetera. It's looking like there's a lot of overlap between these two cells. So like it's sort of like, if you're in the world of business and marketing, it's like omni-channel marketing. It's kind of like omni-channel effect, when it comes to, certain cellular responses when exposed to red and near-infrared light. So it's pretty cool to say the least.
Is there a positive link now between red light therapy and either preventing cancer or recovering from cancer?
Yeah, there's 2 pretty large oncology societies here in the US that actually earlier this year, changed their guidelines. They're now recommending the use of photobiomodulation or red and near-infrared light therapy for the prevention of something called oral mucositis, which is a very common side effect to chemo and radiation. And so because the evidence is really, really clear that not only does red and near-infrared light help heal, right, the mucositis or the sores in your mouth, that are from chemo and radiation, but when used consistently, they can actually help prevent it from happening, which I think is probably the more interesting thing, right? How are your cells are basically functioning so well that your immune response is heightened that you actually can prevent things like that from even happening. So I think that's really interesting. But the evidence right now suggests it's more on the recovery side of cancer, more so than preventing cancer from happening. But nonetheless, this is a really interesting category. In fact, that researcher, Dr. Praveen Irani, mentioned one of the new mechanisms that they're proving out right now in his lab at the University of Buffalo is that there's a cell type that's kind of part of our immune system called TGF-1 beta. And it's a cytokine that plays a big role in our immune response, and that they're noticing a pretty interesting response with that particular cell type, which is leading to increased immune function. And so they've actually studied in their lab an immune response with a healthy cell versus an immune response with a cancerous cell. And ironically enough, the cancer cell, when exposed to red and near-infrared light, actually dies. You see autophagy with those types of cells, which is the exact response that we want, right? We want, all of us have some cancer cells that are living in our bodies right now, and we want those to die off. That's one of the goals with, like fasting as an example. You want to induce autophagy. And so I think that's really cool. That's a really cool like aspect of light therapy that we're learning more and more about, is that you actually get the most ideal response. A healthy cell responds very favorably. A dysfunctional cancerous cell actually responds the exact way you want it to. It dies.
Awesome.
Has anybody tried meditating whilst they're experiencing red light therapy?
Yeah, that's actually a very, very high percentage of our customer base meditates during their red light therapy treatments. I myself, I do something similar to you, Nick, where I stand in front on a vibration plate, nude in front of a big full body device. But we actually, yeah. A lot of our customer surveys, some of our customers report back in those surveys that meditation is actually one of the main practices that they do during their light therapy treatments.
It would be fascinating to see like an ERG, in terms of before and after, if somebody is stressed or they're anxious, and the pre and post coherence with brainwave frequency.
We're working with a group, but they've actually done live testing, with on brainwaves during red light therapy treatments, and it's really, really interesting to see the brain activity during a red light therapy treatment. It's pretty profound.
One of the things that I haven't done yet that I really want to is to start to try and get a correlation between red light exposure at night and my sleep using my Oura Ring, because I think that might give me some really quite fascinating insights. I'm particularly sensitive to blue light, so I always dim the lights at night. Otherwise, my deep sleep is terrible. Are there any correlations between getting better quality sleep and red light?
The evidence isn't as robust as some of those other benefits that I mentioned, but there's certainly some existing evidence that suggests exposure to red light in the evenings does induce better sleep quality. In fact, there's one I'm thinking about right now, which was where the participants were a group of basketball players that used red light in the evenings, and then through quantitative analysis, it was demonstrated that their sleep quality was significantly enhanced. And I think when you think about kind of light in general, you mentioned, Nick, like I would consider myself pretty sensitive to bright blue light too. And some, there's a lot of times where I'm having to work late into the evenings, but if I'm not wearing blue light blocking glasses that prevent or help diminish or reduce the amount of blue light exposure, there's no doubt I struggle to fall asleep in the evenings. I'm that much more stimulated, and that makes sense when you think about the signal that blue light has within our brain. During bright time daylight, I'm out in the sun right now. There's blue light emitting from the sun right now, and that's a signal to my brain that I should be wide awake. I should be awake. But once the sun sets, if you kind of think about natural circadian biology and ancestral kind of living, once the sun sets, my body really should begin to kind of be preparing for sleep. And if I'm still being exposed to bright blue light, there's mixed signals going on, right? The bright blue light is saying, "Hey, Scott, you should be wide awake, and ready for work, ready for play, whatever." But if I don't want that type of signal in the evening when I'm an hour or two away from going to sleep. Our modern lifestyles are the exact opposite of how our sort of biology has adapted over the years. Where now there's a pretty well-known stat, at least here in America, that we spend 93% of our time indoors. When I first heard that stat, I was like, nah, that seems way too high. But then I started thinking about my lifestyle. Woke up in the morning, got ready under artificial light. I commuted, usually during, before the sun had commuted to work, before the sun rose. I was in an office all day. And then by the time I commuted home, the sun had already set. So it's like, man, I might actually be more than 93%, under artificial light. We're getting overloaded with bright blue light at the wrong times of day. Bright blue light's okay during, in the mornings or during the day to kind of help reset our circadian rhythm, because we should be awake during the day. But at night, standing in front of a really bright computer screen or really bright TV that's emitting bright blue light that serves as a mixed signal to our bodies. And that's the sad reality, is that most people are living that type of lifestyle and not even aware of it, not even cognizant of it. And they're seeing a negative impact with things like sleep. And we all know that sleep is pretty important to overall health. So our modern lifestyles don't allow us really to probably adopt good techniques when it comes to light exposure. And so I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that I'd probably, I'd love, to leave your audience with, is that, just be more cognizant of light, its impact on health and, overall function.
The term I'm hearing a lot, Scott, is junk light.
Some people loop too much stuff under this topic of junk light. The core issue with quote unquote junk light is it really comes down to the wavelengths of light that are delivered. We're exposed to the wrong types of wavelengths of light at the wrong times of day because of our modern lifestyles. So, and we just kind of talked about this, that most of us are not getting enough healthy wavelengths from the sunlight, and instead sort of chronically exposed to bright white and bright blue light all day, even into the evenings. That's kind of the core issue when it comes to kind of this topic of junk light or toxic light. The source is semi-important, but when I say source, I mean whether it's from an incandescent source or whether it's from an LED or whether it's from a fluorescent bulb. That's semi-important, but the big issue is the wavelength of light and how our bodies respond to that particular wavelength of light, because it's really, really important. Everyone listening understands how our bodies respond to ultraviolet light. Our bodies produce more vitamin D. We understand that our bodies respond differently to various types of macronutrients, right? Carbohydrates, proteins, fats. The same thing holds true when it comes to light, to wavelengths of light. Our bodies respond differently to various wavelengths of light, some and especially at different times of the day. So just being more aware of that, I think you can help limit kind of your exposure to the junk light or the wrong types of wavelengths of light during certain parts of the day.
Is there a correlation between junk light, that frequency, and mood?
Most people that may have heard of this concept of junk light would say it's blue light. It's all blue light. Bright white light and blue light is junk light. Well, that's not necessarily true, because there's actually some really strong science that suggests blue light and then bright white light can not only reset your circadian rhythm in the morning, right, but it actually can induce better mood. It can actually reduce the symptoms that come from seasonal affective disorder. It can enhance serotonin production. So it can be good. It's just you need to be exposed to that type of light at the right times of day. It's not, I mean, and really just think about the natural sunrise and sunset. Once the sun sets, your body really should be entering a phase of the day where you're beginning to prepare for the evening. And if you're exposed to a lot of bright white and bright blue light, once the sun sets, our bodies take that as a signal that we should be wide awake. And so our bodies respond. There's a whole downstream cascade of events that happen from not releasing melatonin, right? Or releasing too much cortisol, et cetera, because that's a signal to our bodies that it's midday sun, right? We should be wide awake. And so our bodies respond in that light, so to speak. But bright white and bright blue light during the day, ideally it's coming from the natural sun, but during the day, it's not necessarily that big of a deal because we should be wide awake, right? We should be working, we should be functioning. If you can take like a couple steps in the right direction, it would be try to get more natural sunlight exposure with your clothes off, or at least some portion of your clothes off, right? During the day, try to get more of that on a consistent basis. And then the other big takeaway is like, once the sun sets, try to stay away from blue light. Try to do that, whether it's blue light blocking glasses or using different types of light in your house, right? Those that are more warmer in nature that kind of mimic the natural sunset. Those would be two easy free steps that you can take to help kind of mitigate some of the negative consequences with that come from quote unquote junk light.
Scott, how can people find out more about you and Joovv?
The best place is our website, Nick. It's joovv.com. So Joovv is a short for rejuvenate. So it's Joovv. So 2 O's, 2 V's, joovv.com. If you're into this, if you're listening to this and you're kind of into the science and you kind of geek out on it like I do, check out the Learn page on our site. It's chock full of educational articles that are all well sourced, all reviewed by MDs, PhDs, etc. That's a great area of our site to check out. If you want to kind of stay more high level and you're like, what's all this about and what are people saying about it? I check out the reviews page of our site. There's over 1,000, reviews. We publish all of them, even the kind of the negative ones. But you get a sense for like what people are saying in their own words, using this type of therapy on a consistent basis. So those are probably the two areas that I direct you to. But yeah, I mean, this, of course, we'd like to sell light therapy devices to anyone listening, but like the big goal here is that if we can just raise more awareness for just light in general, and that it does play a role in our overall health over someone's lifespan, let's say 80 years. If you're chronically exposed to the wrong types of wavelengths at the wrong times of day and not getting enough natural sunlight over a long period of time at scale, there's very clear evidence that that's not great for overall health. If you can't take some of those easy steps that I mentioned earlier, or you live in an area that's just where you don't get enough natural sunlight, maybe the next step is to get a light therapy device, right? To invest in one. The treatments are really easy. 8 to 10 minutes a day is really all you need. That would be kind of the next step. But just being more aware, being more cognizant of just, the light exposure that you're dealing with on a consistent basis is probably the most important.
Yeah, and I'm sort of sat here under 2 massive LED lights shining at me at 8 o'clock at night. Not a good move. I really should be wearing my blue blocking. Yeah. One last question, Scott, that everybody loves is, what 3 tips would you give to any executive who's looking to improve their personal and professional performance?
The three tips. So the obvious one would be what we just talked about, right? Be more awareness of your light exposure, right? That's easy. Tons of science to support increased function, especially executive function, when it comes to getting the right types of light during the best times of the day. So that'd be one. Number 2 would be this is something that I'm trying to be much more intentional about, with myself anyway, just being more grateful on a consistent basis. As busy executives, I'm sure you guys can attest to this. It's easy to lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, everything goes back in the box, so to speak, right? And so just being more grateful for everything on a consistent basis, I think is something that I'm trying to do more of. Third, always be learning, right? ABL. I'm sure that's not something overly new concept to your to your audience, but I think it's certainly something that's kind of helped me from a professional business standpoint, is to never sort of settle in, so to speak, but always be hungry and always be learning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Scott. That was fascinating.
Yeah, thanks.